This is Radio TV Phono Nut, and yeah, I know I haven't been on in a while. The computer is still being non-cooperative, and I'm about ready to go buy a new one, but until that time we'll try to do a little short video just to let you know that I'm still alive. What we have here is a little Masterwork portable record player from 1964. It's in pretty good cosmetic shape, just needs to be cleaned up a little bit. And it's a fold-down model, sort of like some of the more expensive stereo models, only this one's not stereo. In fact, it's just a single-tube record player with a 3-volt crystal cartridge in it. Standard 4-speed Alliance mechanism, a metal turntable platter. Alright, let's plug it up and see what happens. Well, I can tell already that the motor is seized. I can hear it humming, but obviously there's no rotation. Let it warm up and see what the amplifier does. Turn it all the way up. Getting a little cartridge action, but not much. It's skipping like crazy, but it is producing some output. Alright, as usual, let's fix the amplifier, then we'll work on the drive mechanism. Here's the amp, nothing special, just a typical 1-tube amplifier. And at this time I'd like to call your attention to this very unprofessional repair job. In fact, if I was a repair shop, I'd be ashamed to even do anything like this. It's also sad to think about that they actually charge the customer for this. As you can see, they replaced the electrolytic filter capacitor, and by the looks of this, it only appears that they replaced one section of it, and they just simply rammed an old can capacitor down inside of an empty cardboard tube box and stuffed it down in here. And as you can see, the cardboard tube box is resting right up against this hot output tube. Yeah, I'd say that's a fire hazard, wouldn't you? And I can tell this thing probably wasn't used much after the repair, because if it had been, this box would be all scorched up. So yeah, we'll definitely want to correct that problem. So the first order of business is to get rid of this hack repair and correctly install the filter capacitors, and we'll get rid of these other capacitors in here. This paper capacitor is in our tone control circuit, and this one down here is our chassis isolation capacitor. One end connects to chassis and the other end connects to B-. And we have this selenium rectifier here, which might very well get replaced. And we'll, of course, check the resistors, what few they are, and make sure they're within tolerance. Okay, we have our drive mechanism all cleaned and lubricated. I decided not to show that in detail because of the technical difficulties I've been having lately, and you've seen me do it a million times in the past, so I'm trying to keep this video kind of short. So all that's been cleaned and lubricated and ready to go. Here's our amplifier, newly overhauled. That looks a lot better than what you saw at the beginning of this video. We replaced the selenium rectifier with a silicon diode with a 47 ohm resistor ahead of it to drop the B+ voltage down, since the silicon diode is more efficient than the selenium rectifier. Without the resistor, there'd be more B+ voltage. And surprisingly enough, the cartridge is still good. Our problem was the tone arm was tracking too light. Now, we don't run into that very much. Usually what happens is the tension spring under the tone arm back here gets weak and the tone arm tracks too heavy, but this one was tracking at around 5.5 grams. Now, I know a lot of the audiophiles that are watching this are probably cringing at that figure, but you know, back when this was made, those particular numbers were the norm when it comes to tracking pressure. But even in the 5.5, 6 gram range, that's still too light for one of these 3-volt crystal cartridges. They have to track heavy since they are high output, they have to track heavy enough to where they'll actually stay in the record groove. And according to the specifications I found online, this cartridge is supposed to track in the 10-gram range. So what I had to do was actually replace the counterbalance spring with one that from my assorted spring stash here. I just took a spring and stretched it out, and by trial and error I was able to get it down to 11.5 grams, and that's where I decided to leave it. Now, on some of these types of record players, you might see the word stereo compatible cartridge printed somewhere on it. That's supposed to mean that even though it's a mono cartridge, it has enough vertical and horizontal compliance to safely play a stereo record without damage. But in my personal opinion, when you have a cartridge that's tracking at 10 grams, that's too much for a stereo disc, especially one that you care about. So in my opinion, record players like this should probably be reserved for your older mono records, preferably the ones that are beat up, not ones that you want to keep in mint condition. Well, I don't know how that happened, but now we're down to 8.8 grams. Maybe we have a self-adjusting counterbalance spring that automatically adjusts itself as it sees fit. Okay, let's see how it does with an old 45 here. Engine number coming down the railroad line. How much farther back did she get off? Old brown suitcase that she carried. That's not too bad. Here's an LP. This is one of those Hap Palmer LPs from elementary school. As you can hear, it's playing this type of record fine, but like I said before, these usually don't do too good with stereo records because of the compliance issue, and they also don't do too good with records with a lot of bass because the needle just can't track the groove. And a lot of times what happens with these old cartridges, they might still have output, but the rubber suspension that the stylus rest on becomes hard, and when that happens, the cartridge has even less compliance than it did whenever it was new, and the result is lots of skipping, lots of record wear, and terrible fidelity. But this cartridge still seems to be in pretty good shape. See what happens when we attempt to play a rock album that has lots of bass. It skips like crazy. And there is a way to possibly get around that, but it requires a lot of technical knowledge. First, you'd have to remove this cartridge completely and order one of the new half-volt output stereo cartridges and install it in the tone arm. And since that cartridge has less output, you would have to construct a preamp stage for the amplifier, either with another tube or with a field effect transistor. And then I would have to play with this counterbalance spring to get the tracking pressure down to about 4 or 5 grams, which is what the new cartridge would want to see. And that's generally what I do on these when 99% of the time the original crystal cartridge is bad. I usually don't even bother with replacing it with an original type cartridge. I just modify it for something modern, and that way it will be more reliable and play a wider variety of records. Alright, let's try it with a 78. And of course, these types of record players are just fine for playing 78s. Just make sure you have the proper 78 RPM needle selected, because a 78 has a wider groove than an LP or a 45. Tracking pressure is really not a problem here, because most of these were played on old record players that tracked in the 30 to 90 gram range. That's right, 30 to 90 grams. So 8 to 12 grams is not going to cause much of a problem. Okay, there you go, the little Columbia Masterwork, little one-tube record player from about 1964. All ready to go. Should be good to go for another few decades unless this cartridge craps out. Alright, thanks for watching, and I'll be back online full time as soon as I get some things straightened out on my end here.